Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, as many Americans kick off a new school year across the United States, we find ourselves in a situation where we need to remind you that school choice works. We'll have details from a very interesting event in the White House yesterday. Those details and more coming up. And a good Tuesday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget, if you miss any portion of the program, you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand. It is real simple and easy to do. Just search for the Nick Craig Show in your favorite podcast app or visit the website nickcraig.com. You can also find links to our YouTube, Rumble, and all of our video versions of the program there as well. Our program this morning brought to you by the Law Group here in Wilmington. For any legal questions or challenges, lawgroupnc.com is their website. We'll hear more from Melissa Gott and her team coming up a little bit later on in the program this morning. Well, many across the state of North Carolina and the United States are kicking off their back to school, depending on your state, depending on the area you live in. Some schools started a few weeks ago. Others, like here in North Carolina, have started over the last few days and will continue to start throughout the remainder of this week. And this is a great opportunity to talk about school choice in the United States of America. And this has always been an odd topic and a weird topic for me, and not because of the reason you might think. There is so much emphasis by individuals, largely on the political left, as it relates to public education, that frankly, I find it kind of hard to wrap my head around. When we lay out the overall overarching discussion over children and education, to me, there's really only one thing that matters, and that is a child getting a high quality education? Really, when you boil everything else down, when you cut every other all the other conversation out, to me, that is where the story starts and stops. Is a child getting a high quality education that will set them on a path forward where they can be a productive and useful member of society? That's it. Everything else should just really not even factor in. That should be the end-all be-all conversation. But over the last couple of years, especially here in North Carolina, as we have seen the rise of the Opportunity Scholarship Program here in the state, which gives individuals access to cover portions of tuition at private schools, we have not seen that conversation take place. Just earlier this year, we saw a major protest take place hosted by the North Carolina Association of Educators, a left-wing teachers quote-unquote union that proclaims that they're in the business of supporting teachers and supporting public schools. Meanwhile, you look at some of the details, you look at some of the stats, you look at some of the reports, and you will consistently find that public schools are not performing up to the standard. Now, let me be perfectly clear with what I'm saying here. None of the criticism or controversy here is to say that public schools are not good. I don't believe that that is the case. I am a product of public schools. Many of you are products of public schools. All that I'm really trying to get across is, why are we not focused on the outcome? Why are we so worried about where a child is actually going? There is a major political battle that has been brewing now for decades over public education and the shift to alternative schools. And it's become more prominent again here in North Carolina over the last couple of years, as things like the Opportunity Scholarship Program have truly opened the door for North Carolina families on a wide scale of income, a scale of availability to truly choose and determine where your children are going to go. And we've seen a major double down, predominantly from those on the political left, as it relates to public education. And I just don't get it. There are, for certain families and for certain students, public education is a traditional public school is a great choice. For some families and for some children, a charter school, which is also public, is a great choice. For some families and some students, a private school is a great choice. For some parents and for some families and for some children, homeschooling is a great choice. There are a wide variety of options as it relates to education. And we have completely moved away from the focus of making sure that a child truly has an education. And there has been such a political battle over trying to make sure that children stay in public schools. And it just doesn't make any sense, of course, unless you understand some of the underlying issues. I am a strong believer that the reason that there is so much vitriol and hatred from those on the political left for families that decide to look at education alternatives outside of the public education system, in large part because it is a very useful tool for those on the political left. And I know we're talking about children. I know we're talking about education. I'm not trying to be ugly about this, but I'm just kind of laying out how I see it. And that's what I see. The political left has been very successful over the last couple of decades of turning the government-run public education system into their own tool to indoctrinate the next generation, that they are terrified that families would break away from that. They are terrified that families across the United States are looking at alternatives. They are terrified that they are going to lose control to teach your children things that in large part have no business being in the public education system, have no business being taught by a taxpayer-funded school system. Children need to learn how to read. Children need to learn how to write, how to do math. They need to learn about the history of our nation. There are core functions of school and education that should be talked about, but we should not be having all of these other discussions that we in large part only saw because of COVID-19. I obviously was not a fan of what went on during the COVID-19 lockdowns, the unconstitutional shuttering of businesses, individuals' freedoms and liberties being stripped away by government, all in the name of science, which we've seen over the last couple of years was not science at all. It was nothing more than Anthony Fauci's own ego and his popularity that he was interested in. But the one silver lining, and there were a couple, but one of the biggest silver linings of the COVID-19 pandemic was that for the first time in a very long time, parents truly were able to see what was going on in their children's classroom. Why? Because their children were at home learning on Zoom. Their children were at home taking classes remotely. And many of those same parents were, of course, working from home as well, from whether their businesses went remote or somebody, frankly, had to be home with the children. You had parents literally were able to listen in on what was being taught. And unfortunately, what many families across the nation saw or heard and listened to was incredibly disturbing. Conversations that were not appropriate with school-aged children, blatant social indoctrination of children in classes that had nothing to do with government or politics. This is what has been going on in the public education system for decades. And it wasn't until 2020 and the early parts of 2021 that families truly were able to see and hear with their own eyes and ears what was going on. And many, rightfully so, were mortified with what they were hearing. Sitting and listening to their fourth grade students' class talk about how based on your skin color, you're somebody that is either an oppressor or somebody that is oppressed. Legitimate conversations going on in the state of North Carolina, in North Carolina public schools during COVID. And no surprise, many families that heard these conversations or would then go on to read about these conversations when they started being published in news outlets said, well, we got to find a change. We got to look for an alternative. The goal of sending our children to school is to make sure they're getting a high quality education, not being indoctrinated by the political left. And that's really what it boiled down to. Because at the end of the day, going back to what I mentioned a couple of minutes ago with the Open, the only thing that we should really be caring about is the next generation getting a suitable education that will give them the tools, give them the resources, give them the knowledge they need to become useful, productive members of society. That's really where the story starts and stops from my vantage point. As the school year kicks off for many across the United States, there was an event that took place at the Rose Garden yesterday afternoon. President Donald Trump, alongside Education Secretary Linda McMahon, and families from across the United States attending this event, highlighting the importance, highlighting some of the details on the school choice movement. One of those families was the Griffith family from North Carolina. Pastor Caleb Griffith, his wife Jocelyn, and their 5 children were one of the families at that event. We'll hear from Pastor Caleb Griffith coming up here in just a little bit as he spoke and talked about the real impact that North Carolina's Opportunity Scholarship Program has had for him and his family. He has one child with autism, another that is developmentally delayed, and highlighted how school choice movements like the Opportunity Scholarship Program here in North Carolina have truly helped him and his family and have allowed his children to get an education that suits their needs. Right? We are not, as a society, we are not as human beings, one size fits all people. Some people learn certain ways, some people learn others. And finding a school, finding an educator, finding an education platform that fits your family, your children, and their needs should be the utmost priority. But in recent years, it has not been the case. It's all been about, we got to keep kids in public schools. You see this debate constantly in North Carolina. When a family decides that a public school based on a zip code that could be a failing school doesn't work for them and their family, and decide they want to go somewhere else, decide that they want to look at education alternatives, they are turned into the bad guy because they are abandoning the public school system. They're ripping away resources from the public school system. I'm not interested in the public school system. I'm not interested in any individual school system or school. I am interested in making sure that the next generation of Americans have a competent enough education that they can become useful, productive members of society. That's really it. Long story short, that's it. I don't care about any individual school or any individual school entity. It's not the school that I'm worried about. It's the children that are the responsibility of said educational institution. So let's jump up to Washington, D.C., this school choice event yesterday. Here's the open from President Donald Trump.
But from the very beginning of our country, Americans have understood that there's no job more important than teaching our children to become happy, healthy, proud, productive, and flourishing citizens. And unfortunately, in the 4 years I took office, and since I took office, our educational system itself was really, it was incredibly, before I got here, it was weaponized like everything else in our government. Everything was weaponized against the goals that we all stand for. And under the last administration, extreme ideologies such as critical race theory and transgender insanity were forced upon our children as young as 4 and 5 years old. Transgender didn't work. Students were taught that our heroes are villains. The FBI was used to target patriotic parents at school board meetings. And meanwhile, far too many government-run schools failed at the basics. And you just have to look at the charts. They were failing at a thing called education, with only 30% of the students proficient in reading and math. That was under the last administration. Under the Trump administration, we're systematically ending every single one of these radical left betrayals. and we're putting the parents back in charge. They're the ones that love our children. They're the ones that should be in charge.
And that's the big issue right there. That is why there is so much nonsense going on as it relates to education, because of the words that you just heard come out of the president's mouth and echoed by many across the United States. It is the parents that are responsible for their children. They send them to a school, whether that be a traditional public school, a charter school, a private school, whatever sort of education, or whatever sort of school, I should say. They send their children there to get an education, and that's it. The school system is not responsible for raising your children. The school system is not responsible for indoctrinating your children, telling them what they should believe and how they should believe things. No, it is a singular goal of education. And unfortunately, we have seen over the last 50 or 60 years, in large part, the public school system drift away from that purpose. President Donald Trump said that these schools, well, they're on notice.
Every public school in America is now on notice that if they tell a child that they're trapped in the wrong body, they are committing child abuse. And as we remove the far-left extremism from the classroom, we're taking historic action to ensure that every child in America has access to a first-class education. The United States spends more money on education than any other country in the world by double, and our results should be better than they are. I would look at lists where we're rated out of the 40 top nations, we're rated number 38, 39, and number 40 with all the money we spent. But Linda has changed that so rapidly and so drastically, and frankly, it's shocking how fast it's gone under her leadership. 1 year ago, as part of the great big beautiful bill, we passed the Education Freedom Tax Credit, the largest ever expansion of school choice, and we want, thank you. And we want every parent to have the power to send their child to a high-quality school that shares their values. It's so important.
Who would object to that? I mean, I know everybody, of course, you know, if you're politically involved and on the political left, you have to hate Donald Trump. It's just part of what you have to do here in 2026. But who would object to the idea that parents should decide based on their children, who, of course, they inherently know very well as it is, in fact, their children? Who would object to the fact and object to the idea that parents should have the opportunity to determine where their children truly get an education? Give me the reason outside of the purpose I already stated of using the public education system, using the government-run school system as an indoctrination tool for the political left. Why would anybody object to that? Again, if the goal is, and I believe that it truly is, if the goal is to make sure that regardless of the child, regardless of where they live, that they are getting a top-notch, high-quality education that sets them on a path for success for the rest of their lives, we shouldn't care where that happens. We shouldn't care if that's taking place in a government-run public school, a charter school, a full-on private school, a church school, homeschooling, magnet schools. There's these pod schools that have popped up in certain states where they've changed some laws there. It shouldn't matter, and it doesn't matter to me. It seemingly has become a major issue for many on the political left to deal with in recent years because they're afraid that they're going to lose their influence. Again, to their credit, giving the devil his due on this, the Democratic Party has been very successful in large part through its teachers' unions, which all sway very, very, very far to the political left, have used our taxpayer dollars throughout the public education system to indoctrinate the next generation into becoming radical leftist liberals. That's the God's honest truth. That's what you're seeing. And it is the only way in which I can wrap my head around the nonsense that exists when parents decide they no longer want to send their children to a public school. It's the only reasonable conclusion that I can come up with. We'll have more from this event at the White House yesterday coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to tell you about the Law Group here in Wilmington and thank Melissa Gott and her team for their continued support of the Nick Craig Show and remind you that when legal challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the law group here in Wilmington. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across eastern North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense, the law group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, folks. They're located in downtown Wilmington and just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or online at lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group, experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate Melissa Gott and the team at the Law Group for their continued support of the Nick Craig Show. All right, quick break. More on the school choice. We'll hear from a family here in North Carolina, the Griffith family. We'll hear from another family in Florida, and then we'll round it out with Education Secretary Linda McMahon as the Nick Craig Show rolls on a Tuesday morning, streaming live, YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7, wherever you get your podcasts. All right, a good Tuesday to you, and welcome back to the Nick Craig Show as we continue the discussion today on school choice, as many kiddos across the state of North Carolina are heading back to school. Many started yesterday, some kicking off their school day today and through the remainder of the week. And it's bringing forth the discussion that's been brewing over the last couple of years about school choice, as we've seen states like here in North Carolina, the North Carolina General Assembly dramatically making changes to the Opportunity Scholarship Program to make sure that every family in North Carolina, regardless of income level, has the ability to send their child to a school that best fits their need. And that, to me, is the long and the short of this story. I don't care about public schools. I don't care about charter schools. I don't care about private schools. I don't care about homeschooling. That's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about the education When a student graduates from high school, when they have gone through the 12th grade and are determining what they're going to do next, whether it's to skip college completely and get into business for themselves, go to a trade school, go to a community college, a traditional four-year school, whatever it might be, is that individual student, who at that time is still a teenager, are they set up for success moving forward? Are they set up based on their education, regardless of where they got it, to have a successful and prosperous future? If the answer is no, which in large part I think it is right now, we have a problem. Because we are spending, as you heard from the president in the last segment, spending an exorbitant amount of money on education throughout the United States of America. And frankly, when you compare us to the rest of the world, our stats suck. We spend an exorbitant amount of money and we are not seeing the results. And that is in large part through the public education system, as many families are deciding to look at education alternatives. At this event in the Rose Garden yesterday afternoon, a North Carolina family was in attendance and spoke. That is Pastor Caleb Griffith, his wife Jocelyn, and their 5 children, 2 of which their children came from foster care. One has autism, the other has developmental delays. Here is Pastor Griffith talking about what school choice has meant for him and his family.
I'm Pastor Caleb Griffith, and I'm joined by my 5 beautiful children. As President Trump said, 2 of them came to us through foster care, which is wonderful. But my children, one of them has autism and one has developmental delays. And although they qualify for an IEP, because of the situation, they were unable to get them. So we've been unable to access the support and help they need to be successful. And we're blessed to be from a state that offers school choice, and it has helped part of our children's educational needs. I personally have seen the benefit of the Opportunity Scholarship for my family and the school my children attend, Cornerstone Christian Academy, who is up for running for the Yaz Prize. But it's thanks to great organizations like Parents for Educational Freedom, who have helped 105,000 families just like mine access the Opportunity Scholarship. And now, because of you, Mr. President, and because of you, Secretary McMahon, the Educational Freedom tax credits will give my children the access to the services they need to be successful in the most formational years of their lives. I want to tell you, we only get one chance to educate our children, and our children are the future of America. The Bible says to train up a child in the way that they should go, and that's to parents, and this allows parents to do that. So on behalf of my family and every family in America that will access this, thank you, President Trump, and God bless America.
Thank you. Again, who objects to this? If you walk into a Democrat stronghold right now and say, hey, what are your thoughts on the Opportunity Scholarship Program? You will hear that the Opportunity Scholarship Program, which was recently over the last couple of years expanded here in North Carolina, is destroying education across the state. That's what the claim will be. And when they say that, it's not actually education that's being destroyed. It is the grip. It is the reliance on the public school system that they claim is quote unquote being destroyed. Regardless of your family, regardless of your situation. And you just heard firsthand there from a family here in North Carolina whose children attend the Cornerstone Christian Academy in Statesville that said, hey, based on an autism diagnosis and some developmental delays, IEPs that were not dealt with by the public school system, we as parents said that we need an alternative. We as parents said we need to find an alternative solution to make sure that our children get the best and highest quality education that fits their needs. Anybody that objects to that is truly not interested in education. They are interested in ideology. They are interested in pushing a political narrative. You cannot listen to a story like that and tell me that the Opportunity Scholarship Program, that school choice is damaging to the United States of America and to a state like North Carolina. Here's another example, a family from Florida that takes advantage of homeschooling and will now have additional opportunities due to some of these new federal tax credits.
Homeschooling is something that is very personal to me. Back in 1988, my parents made the decision to homeschool me. And so I was homeschooled from kindergarten all the way through the 12th grade. And I've been blessed with the opportunity to do the same for my family. Back in 1988, homeschooling wasn't popular. And there was not, I don't think, a president who was supporting us. At this time, to see your administration and all that you've done for homeschooling families not only means the world to me, but to also all the other homeschooling families that are out there. With the great big beautiful bill, the expansion of 529, oftentimes with homeschooling or one income households, because I'm working and my wife is schooling the kids. So being able to have the extra resources to provide them with their needs, and also the option to support our children in the way that we see fit means the world. So I just want to thank you for everything that you've done.
Again, what's the objection here? That you don't like homeschooling? Again, it's not about the type of location. It's not about the physical building in which the education is going on. At least it's not from my vantage point. It should be, regardless, homeschool, public school, whatever, anywhere in between. Is the child set up for success? Is the next generation getting the tools, learning the critical thinking skills, learning all that is necessary to be a useful, productive member of society? I mean, it's so fascinating because throughout nearly every other facet of our lives, we exercise choice every single day. Many of you earlier today may have gone out and gotten a coffee out from somewhere, whether it was a Starbucks or a Dunkin' Donuts, maybe a fast food establishment, a gas station. You had choice, right? Because it doesn't really matter. It's about you want coffee. And so you'll choose the place that you want to get it done. And I use these simple analogies for this purpose. We exercise choice in nearly every other facet of our life, day in and day out. Yet when it comes to educating your children, you are told that choice is bad. When it comes to making sure that an educational institution is providing for your children and your family, you are told, no, choice is not good. Choice is the problem. It makes no sense. It falls flat on its face. Of course, unless you are truly in the business of trying to indoctrinate. And frankly, throughout COVID-19, one of the silver linings, like I mentioned a little while ago, was the fact that parents were finally able to see what was going on in their children's classroom. You heard the president mention in his opening comments how the Federal Bureau of Investigation was going after families that were showing up at school board meetings during COVID and reaming out school boards across the United States for what they were hearing out of their children's classrooms, hearing out of the mouths of their children's teachers. And for that, what were you called? A domestic terrorist. Yes. You are concerned that your child may not be actually getting a high quality education. I'll note in the school in which you pay for, if it's a public school, you show up to voice your concern. You show up to voice your displeasure. And in the eyes of the FBI under the Biden administration, you are a domestic terrorist. You are trying to destroy the United States of America. It is all political, folks. I hate to say it. We're talking about children. We're talking about education, but let's just call it what it is. This is all political for those on the left. It is. And you're not going to convince me otherwise. You can't tell me that families showing up to school board meetings because of COVID lockdowns, or parents showing up to school board meetings pissed off beyond belief because their young female athletes are having to sit in or stand and change in locker rooms with biological men, are being labeled and deemed domestic terrorists by the federal government, that this is anything but politics. It fits every single earmark of what you would expect to be a political a fight, a political back and forth here in the United States. We are rounding out the discussion on school choice, a very cool event taking place in the Rose Garden at the White House yesterday as many families kicked off a new 26-27 school year. We've heard from a couple of different families, including the Griffith family here from Statesville, North Carolina, highlighting what the Opportunity Scholarship, what school choice has done for them and their family, giving their children and family the true educational freedoms and opportunities that they need to set their children up for success moving forward. We'll now hear from Education Secretary Linda McMahon as she talked about some of the issues as it relates to the national report card in years past.
This school year marks a return to common sense in American education, and it's all thanks to the leadership of our president, President Trump. I remember when President Trump called me shortly after the Biden's administration 2024 Nations Report Card, or NAEP, as you've heard, scores were released, and he told me he was angry and he was also embarrassed by where these scores were. We spoke about what a travesty it is that Americans have invested $3 trillion in a federal Department of Education meant to improve student outcomes, and yet only 30% of our students can read or do math proficiently. This is why President Trump demanded a hard reset to our education system. And under his leadership, we are delivering it.
Just let that sink in for a second. 30% of students in public education across the United States, of which we spend literally trillions of dollars a year on, only 30% proficient in reading, writing, and math. By any metric, by any amount of information you would look at, that is an abject failure. But that is what the government has instilled as it relates to public education. And they have consistently and for large part, for many years, buried their head in the sand on this, pretend that it's not an issue, and then get pissed off at you as a family when you say, you know what, I'm really not interested in sending my kid to a school that has failing scores. I'm really not interested in sending my kids to a school based on where we live, based on a zip code, to a school that doesn't fit my child's needs. You're the problem. You're the enemy, not the public school system that has done a horrific job as it relates to making sure that the next generation is capable and is going to rise up to be prosperous and successful teenagers and then young adults. No. Not their problem, your problem for looking for an alternative. Secretary McMahon highlighted some of the additional changes that she has been making and the administration has been making in D.C.
This school year, American parents and students have so much to be excited about because the Trump administration is steering education back to its rightful focus, serving students, so that they are prepared for successful futures.
What a novel concept. What a radical idea there from Linda McMahon. We're going to make sure that, let me check my notes here. Yes, schools actually provide a good education. What a crazy, radical idea from the Secretary of Education. Again, who objects to this? Who is gonna die on this hill with everything that you've just heard? It makes no sense.
Our administration has cut billions in funding for radical DEI programs and redirected those dollars to teachers, classrooms, and results, supporting evidence-based literacy instruction, pouring record funding into charter schools, and energizing workforce training. Key decisions that once sat with bureaucrats here in Washington, D.C. are moving to where they belong, to the hands of educators, parents, and local leaders who know these children best. 6 states now hold the first ever returning education to the state waivers, freeing over $100 million from federal micromanagement. These waivers allow state leaders to direct federal dollars towards what makes the most sense for their students and not what Washington thinks is best for those students. Additionally, a record 25 states are exercising EdFlex authority, which allows them to immediately free thousands of local school districts from mountains of red tape without first having to receive approval from the Department of Education. And under President Trump's leadership, we are restoring parents' sacred role as the first decision makers in their children's lives. Children belong to their parents, not the federal government.
There's the problem there for Secretary McMahon. That's not what the left agrees with. They want the government to be responsible for raising your children. Was the old Hillary Clinton line, it takes a village, right? You as a parent, you don't know what you're doing. So let's get the quote unquote village together on this and make sure that your children, they go down the right path, which of course would be political indoctrination. And you know, this the criticism here as it relates to the public school system really isn't an issue with the school systems itself. It has everything to do with the bureaucracy and the bloat. Because so many public schools, or I would argue, I think every single public school gets some level of federal dollars that flow in. There is red tape, regulation, and a whole bunch of nonsense that takes place because of that. And unfortunately, we know very well that the federal and in large part state governments do a really bad job at this stuff. We see example after example, week after week, where the government just miserably fails at a simple stated goal. The Department of Education should be in the business of making sure that students are successful in the United States of America. The Department of Education has overseen some of the largest declines in public education over the last 30 or 40 years. It is their sole goal. It is literally called the Federal Department of Education, and they can't do that. It is time that we return a lot of this authority and a lot of this responsibility back to the local level. More from Secretary McMahon.
And through the Education Freedom Tax Credit, President Trump has delivered the largest national expansion of education freedom in history for over 50 million eligible children, giving parents unprecedented freedom to choose the path that is best for their child. So it's no surprise that over half of our nation's states, both red and blue, have raced to this historic choice option, benefiting families whether their child attends public or private school. Parents can also rest assured that wherever their child goes to school, this administration is vigorously protecting their right to know what's happening inside those walls. After the Biden administration allowed schools to secretly transition students without parents' knowledge, President Trump is defending parental rights like never before. At his direction, we are working hand in hand with the Department of Justice to ensure no school district ever has more power over a child than their own parents.
Again, that's the gripe. That's the issue. That's the concern for all of these left-wing education unions, for all of these left-wing groups that have infiltrated the public school system. They don't want parents involved. Why? Because parents, of course, are mortified with what they hear. Parents are disgusted and disturbed by what they're hearing coming out of educators' mouths within the public school system. And so they are trying like crazy to keep their complete and total monopoly over education. If you have a child, and unless you're very well off and can afford private school, your only option is to send your kids to a government-run public school based on a zip code. Here in North Carolina, thankfully, because of our Republican-led General Assembly, we now have universal school choice through the Opportunity Scholarship Program, giving middle-class North Carolinian families the ability to send their children to an alternative school, giving them, as parents, the ability to determine what kind of educational institution is best for my children and for my family. And it has become a major battle. I would argue it is a losing issue for those on the political left. And frankly, another great example of a conversation we are only having because the political left went overboard with its indoctrination campaign. People saw it, people's eyes were shown this, and they were woken up to this in large part during the COVID-19 pandemic. They've been revolting ever since, and now it has turned into this major political firestorm where governments believe that they know best about you and your children. And as we know very clearly, that is absolutely not the case. It's not. There is literally nothing. You held a gun to my head right now and said, hey, Nick, list me 5 things that the government does very well. You'd have to pull the trigger because I can't. Government fails at everything that it freaking does. Everything that it touches, it fails at. Now, it might not be a public abject failure, but it costs way more than it would need to cost in the private sector. The results are almost in every single case worse than if private entities. But we just saw a story last week, and we're not going to get into it here on the show. But the state of North Carolina and its Wildlife Commission, according to a Wake County Superior Court judge, failed in its sole purpose of protecting fisheries in the eastern half of North Carolina. That's it. That's the sole job that this division had within the state of North Carolina. Protect the fisheries. They failed at that. That was the only freaking thing that they were responsible for, and they couldn't do it. If they can't manage that, do we believe that they can manage a full-throated, very large, very complex public education system? The answer to me is pretty clear. My goal on this is not to beat up on public schools. As I noted, I'm a product of public schools. For most people, public schools are fine. And public schools are a great option for you and your family. But if they're not, why are you the enemy? If they're not, why are you the demon that has been spawned? It makes no sense. Unless, of course, the goal is truly not education, but political indoctrination. Bravo to Secretary McMahon, President Donald Trump, and the rest of the administration. And of course, here our Republican-led General Assembly in North Carolina that have truly given parents the freedom and the opportunity to say, to hell with what's going on at the government. We know what's best for our children. I'm looking forward to continuing to watch the school choice movement grow here in North Carolina. And yes, eventually see a situation where less and less families are reliant on government-run public schools. We'll keep an eye on this school choice movement. This is something that is growing in a lot of states as relevant stories come forward here in North Carolina. We'll bring you the latest right here on the Nick Craig Show. All right, that's going to do it for a Tuesday edition. Once again, thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. LawGroupNC.com or 910-251-6088. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. Available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app. And heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Enjoy your Tuesday. We'll do it again tomorrow morning right here on the Nick Craig Show.